Hi, Dr. Alexandra. Welcome back to the show. And it's very exciting to say welcome back because I think you're my first ever repeat guest, besides maybe like two or three really close people.
Oh, I love that. I'm happy to be back. I remember our conversation well, and I remember how much I enjoyed it.
Oh, well, it was over 2 years ago, and I was just engaged, and now I'm married. So we have updates, we have new things to talk about.
Congratulations on your wedding. I was thinking about that beautiful quote from Maya Angelou that people won't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And I can't even tell you what you and I talked about, but I remember feeling really good sharing space with you.
Wait, that is so kind. Thank you. Thank you so much. Leading up to my wedding and marriage, like I've always been into relationships and studying them and trying to improve myself so that I could show up better in my relationship. But now that I am married, I suppose that the thing that we think about most often as a couple is the challenges and changes that are in store for us long term, both
Mm,
individually and as a unit. The Our first like 9 months of marriage kind of beat us up. My
mm.
husband got in a car accident. We were dealing with a plethora of family stuff, and just like a
Oh,
lot of things were getting thrown at us. Luckily, we were able to stay strong.
good.
And I often wondered like how much of that was attributed to like our strong union versus just the excitement of being married and like being at the beginning of our journey together,
Mhm.
as opposed to like in some rocky middle where the two of us are changing and
Mm.
developing. You said love evolves over time, and you can't expect year one to look the same as year five and year 10. So I want to dive deep into that and talk about how we can love someone so deeply without losing ourselves, and love each other through all those different phases of growth and evolution and challenges and tribulations.
Great. That's great. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's
Let's
dive
do
in. I'm sure you could relate to this, like reading your work and everything. But as somebody who's like feminist minded, like very empowered, independent, my mom always told me, like, make your own money, get your degree, like, make sure you're established on your own. So my whole life, I've just done just that and kind of resisted losing myself in a relationship. But I see a lot of women, and myself included, that like ultimately that is something that we want. And one thing about relationships is like you have to compromise some of yourself. Sometimes a disbalance between how much, in a heteronormative sense, like a woman will sacrifice
it. Hmm.
certain wants and needs and dreams versus a man. If you've seen that in your work with couples and
For sure.
how it manifests.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess, one thing I want to say right off the top is I'm sorry about your husband's car accident. Like that is, I'm glad that I hope that he's healing and I hope that he's okay. And imagine, I can imagine what an ass kicking, like you said, the first 9 months messed us up. Like I can imagine that that's not right. That's not something that you had in your, on your vision board for the first year of marriage by any stretch of the imagination. And I also imagine that the way that the two of you experienced the car accident was shaped in part by where you were. And I think it's a really interesting point you're making, that like a crisis or a stressor, an external stressor like
Mhm.
that, a car accident, it hits different based on where each of you are individually, where the relationship is, in its stages. And it sounds like one of the observations you're making is perhaps the two of you were buoyed by kind of still riding high from the transition to marriage. And my hope for you is that if that same car accident happened in year 10 of your marriage, you'd be buoyed by something else. You'd be buoyed
Mhm.
by, like that deep sense of like, okay, we got it. Here we are back in the trenches. We know
Yeah.
this trench. We've been here before. We've got this. So rather than like, there's always that what buoys you as a couple may change from year 1 to year 10 to I'm in year 25. What buoys you is different. I think be open to that and be curious about, okay, so what are we going to leverage in this moment? The two of you
Yeah.
actually you can't leverage a long history, right? Of many, many experiences like this,
Mm.
the way that Todd and I could leverage that, but you
Mhm.
found something to leverage. And so I think that's a really
Yeah.
interesting way of kind of framing, like that when something comes at us as a couple, that, by the way, hits differently, right? Your husband was the one in the car accident, but you were the one whatever you'd had to do, driving to the hospital terrified, or being really patient as he, recovered. Like you were the witness to that experience. So there was a we thing, but there was also
Mhm.
two different me things. And
Mhm.
and you found a way of kind of leveraging the still kind of riding high from the transition to marriage. And that was helpful. Couples have always got to have something helpful in the face of a
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah. Well, what I'm hearing you say is that are helpful in 2023 is the fact that we made these beautiful vows and commitments. So external stressors, aside from the car accident, say like family stuff,
Hmm.
we were reminded of those because they were relatively fresh. But perhaps you and Todd facing something 25 years later, and Stan and I facing something in our future, maybe that thing that we lean on, that we know is reliable, is like, we've been through this before, we could do it
Yeah.
again. So there's different things to leverage at different points in a
Right.
marriage.
Right. Right. It's amazing how much time I spend as a couples therapist, looking for all of. I think that's because that's what I know is that's my couple's most powerful tool. It's like, okay, so what are we leveraging? What are we using? How do we find just even the little way that the wind is at this couple's back instead of at their face? And so I know one of my main jobs as a couples therapist is to always be looking for it, because especially when a couple is either in a scary moment or in a difficult chapter, it can be really hard to find that, okay, like what the hell, what do we have going for us? And so sometimes you do
Yeah.
need your couples therapist to be like, I know, I can see it. You can't see it right now, but I can see it.
Yeah, yeah, and our couples therapists, like, they help you. You're at a crossroads. You can choose, and maybe one micro decision, like choose how to react. Maybe one micro moment won't make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things, but they all add up. So, like, for example, the car accident, like he took my car. My car's completely totaled. Like in that moment, I could choose whether or not to mention that at all. Obviously, it's the last thing on my mind. Like
Uh-huh.
I'm just praying that he's okay. He got hit by a drunk driver. Like so scary.
Oh,
Definitely made you think about like how precious life is and like the what
yeah.
ifs. But after getting through all that, like I could have been like, why'd you take my car? And now it's totaled. And now I have to deal with this. And now interest rates are high and this and that. But like
Hmm.
I chose, I'm like, you know what? We're dealing with enough. Like, that's not even something I'm going to
Uh-huh.
ever, ever verbalize to him or try to make him feel guilty about in any world.
That's right. That's right. While also, while I think that's such a wonderful thing to bring up, because I think that yes, you have a choice about whether and when you ever bring it up to Stan. But the thing that I hope you can do is just make it real for yourself. Just allow yourself to have a little micro pity party for yourself, or say it to somebody else, or just because because I think what we often do when we have a thought we have a thought and a feeling attached to that thought. Like the thought is, that was my car. The feeling is all of the frustration and anxiety about what that means about interest rates and the hassle of getting a new car.
I mean, going from 1.9 to 6% is like a big
It's not great. It's not great.
jump.
But so
Anyway.
often what happens when we have a moment like that is we like layer over the thought and feeling. We layer over it a judgment of ourselves. How could I? What kind of a petty person thinks about this when my husband could have da 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 da, And so I think it's so important when we do that thing. We have the thought, we have the feeling attached to the thought. We wrap the entire thing up with a self criticism about, I'm not a good wife. A good wife wouldn't even think about that at a time like this. I'm being petty. Da, da. Those judgments are what sink us like a stone. So that's what, in that moment of that, quote unquote, petty thought, just allowing it, just being like, oh, okay, you're here. Along with worry, along with gratitude, you
Mhm.
also are here. The kind of worry about the strategic, pragmatic impacts of this thing. All right, you can have
Mhm.
a seat. You can have a seat at the table. You don't get to sit at the head of the table. You don't get
Yeah.
to, be the part of me that reports back to my husband. But you're
Mhm.
welcome here, because you're as real as anything else, right? Anything that we experience is real and doesn't need that kind of double dose of judging ourselves for having the thought and for having the feeling.
Mhm. Oh,
But you're right,
100%.
we do get to make a choice then about what we do with it.
Yeah, I am absolutely smitten by like parts of self work and just like seeing that as like all these parts of you
Yeah.
seated at your kitchen table having dinner. Who gets to be the head? Exactly. Who gets to talk? Who gets to take over? I
Right.
love visualizing it in that way.
Mhm.
In your work with particularly hetero couples, do you find that the woman is more likely to kind of put her stuff aside for the sake of her partner's dreams or
Mhm.
challenges or whatever, like kind of
Yeah. Yeah, let's go back to that because you had talked that was another place that you wanted us to go is talking about kind of ways that we lose ourselves. And I think that
yeah.
when we're talking about a heteronormative couple, I think those worries are very real because when you have the backdrop of patriarchy and when your body and your partner's body line up so perfectly with roles that have been in place for thousands of years, it's so easy just to step into that role. We know, you and I can make a list. Anybody listening to this show could make a list of what it means to be a good wife, all the things that a good wife does. It would be the easiest list to come up with because we just have been socialized 8 ways to Sunday to know what that means. And by the way, we could do the same thing for a good husband. But the way that that list looks, because the nature of patriarchy is exactly what you're saying, is that the default setting is to put her in a space of sacrifice, giving, accommodating, kind of staying really pliable,
Mhm.
filling in here, moving, maneuvering, reshuffling her list of priorities in the face of whatever's happening. That's just sort of what
Yeah.
it's what's required when your role is homemaker, right? Like that's been, if we've divided it up, it's sort of as provider and homemaker, the heart
Mhm.
of being a homemaker is pivotability. Whatever you thought you were
Mhm.
going to do, you're accommodating, you're making more space for this person. So that's the nature of it. And so I think that couples, I really want my heterosexual couples to to be able to look at that and know that any choice that the two of them are making, whether it's a big decision like where we live, a big decision like how are we going to care for this baby, or a little decision about, do I give the baby a bath while you clean up the kitchen? Do I go do this email while you feed the baby? Like those micro decisions, they're all happening against that like backdrop where we're either
Yeah.
replicating or challenging what we've been taught we should do. I know that I very often am wanting to invite men to just look at that. Like I'll bring that gender conversation into a couples therapy session. It's not ever, ever, ever about blaming men, but it's about inviting men to say, listen, there's a whole thing. You didn't make it happen, but there's a whole thing that exists inside of your wife or your girlfriend that is about, she's a good wife to the degree that she accommodates, and but when she accommodates, she feels like she's losing herself. So there's a whole internal battle that is just different for you as a husband, as a man. It's different.
Mhm.
I think when a man accommodates, it's pretty easy to feel a sense of like pride. And, I don't think that there's the same I'm losing myself kind of concern when a man accommodates. And I think the world gives him lots of pats on the back if he
Yeah.
moves for her career or if he takes care of the baby while she does something. The world
Yeah.
is sort of like they're, cheering
Mhm.
for him. So I
And
think that's where some of the tensions come.
yeah, 100%, and it's noticeable. I watched this interesting video where they were talking about how generally, like, even men's work around the house is, like, completable as opposed to ongoing. So, for example, mowing the lawn, like, blowing the leaves in the backyard, fixing a car, like, it's, like, one done
That's
maybe
right.
a couple times a month at max, right? Whereas a work, like, that's generally attributed to women's work, doing dishes, that is ongoing 3, 4, 5 times a day. You're feeding your family, you're doing dishes, and they
Never
never end. And so that expectation of there's no do, done, complete, and get credit for it,
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
there is with some of the stuff that's stereotypically attributed to
Yeah.
men's work.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, I think that is absolutely true about, men's work versus women's work, which is why I am forever grateful for Eve Rodsky and her fair play system. Like when I got her book and got her deck, I was like tearful, like, oh my God, look at what you did. This has been a
Yeah.
problem for me. It's been something I've been teaching about and talking about for years and years and years. And so I just love what she did. So anybody who's listening, who's partnered, whether you're queer or straight, it's just a beautiful resource to say, like, let's look in a really expansive way about all of what goes into labor, in
Yeah.
this home and in this family. And it's just so it's highly it's so illuminating and so important. Now I will say that I think that one of the places that women can get tripped up is because there's this internal tug of war of
Mhm.
accommodate versus not accommodate. If I accommodate, I'm a good wife, but I'm losing myself. If I don't accommodate, I feel rigid and I'm worried about like kind of my level of commitment or what's wrong with me. So there's sort of like this like never ending tension. I will say that when she's wrapped up in that inner processing, I think it's really easy for her to lose sight of her male partner's journey to commitment. Like I think because there are and have been so many shifts inside of him, accommodations, sacrifices, griefs, expansions that he's been going through as well,
Mhm.
that I think is very becomes really easy for her to lose sight of and not be able to notice all of the ways that he's showing up, that he's demonstrating commitment, that he is letting go of his experience of himself as a single person and really
Mhm.
taking on a sense of being a we. So I think that she like understandably becomes fear loaded and a little bit like kind of myopic, like in her own world about it. And so I think it's really helpful to like kind of like lift up your head and get curious about what has changed for you as our commitment has deepened.
Yeah.
Like what feels different inside of you? Just to ask those questions and be curious about it because he may not be talking about it openly and she may be so concerned about her own loss of self that she's not asking about what's going on for him.
Yeah, part of, like, the beauty and sometimes the double-edged sword of women and the way we've been socialized and some of our gifts and strengths lie in, like, the ability to introspect and then communicate that. So sometimes it feels like I do this to my husband. I'm like, "Let me just pull it out of
Good.
you," like,
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like I have to pull it out, like, I'm the one thinking about it. I'm the one trying to be cognizant of it. I'm the one having conversation with you, perhaps with my therapist. Honestly, the best thing that I did for myself as of late is I stopped doing individual therapy and we just do maintenance couples therapy like twice a month
Mm.
because it just lets us both be in the conversation without me feeling like I'm doing that emotional labor of like, let me talk about you in therapy and then have a follow up therapy session with what I wish you talked about in your therapy sessions vicariously through what I
Oh,
learned.
good
You
for
know what I
you.
mean? Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's felt very empowering because like we're just both in the conversation asking those types of questions like how has it changed for you, like what parts of yourself have you had to grieve
Yeah,
and give up maybe and change.
yeah, 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 and I think part of how we socialize boys and men is that I think that men often feel like I can't and I shouldn't talk to
Mhm.
her about my own process because I'm going to be burdening her with it. I should just deal with this on my own. And by the way, it feels hella vulnerable to have her watching me as I try to like put this
Yeah.
into words because something's been happening inside of me, but I haven't really been processing it with my guy friends or I'm not in therapy or whatever. And so when she's looking at me and asking me these questions or like I certainly wouldn't initiate a conversation with her about it because I don't want to burden her. I'm not quite sure what it all means anyways. And the idea that this is something shareable doesn't actually even occur to me. So it's oftentimes not until she asks the question that he's like, "Oh, I mean, I suppose I could talk about this," but it sort of feels strange. I think oftentimes feels strange to him. Like, but isn't this the
Yeah.
kind of thing that I'm just figuring out on my own? Where then for her, it's like it's actually immensely helpful for her to hear it because it reminds her she's not the only one sacrificing. She's not the only one expanding. She's not the only one grieving. So I think it
Mhm.
really is so helpful to feel like, okay, good. There's stuff going on. So I'm not the only one doing all of the changing and growing and working in this relationship.
That's a great example scenario of how, like, ultimately the patriarchy and these gender roles and boxes and stereotypes, they hurt all of us. Like, they
Hmm.
make us feel guilty for, like, overthinking on it, and meanwhile, he's feeling, I don't know, repressed or suppressed or not able to, like, communicate effectively because he
Hmm.
wasn't shown that that's, like, an important part of a relationship. So it's a journey. I think that's why I love couples work so much is because I really do feel like in some small way, like, it's fighting the patriarchy. It's
Oh,
redefining.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes, I know, yeah. My favorite moment is when either partner, but with a straight couple especially, when she says, "Huh, I hadn't heard that before." And you watch her soften. "I hadn't heard that before. I
Mm.
didn't know that." Like, that's just such a beautiful moment.
Like, I didn't know you felt that way?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
didn't know you felt that way. I didn't know that was what was going on for you. And maybe, at some point, I think some point the goal is to not need to have a couples therapist there to facilitate those conversations,
Mhm.
but it is, I mean, the power of our own narratives are so powerful that it is, so easy to get lost in them. And it is then important to have somebody kind of shake us awake and be like, okay, maybe hear about it from the other
Yeah.
perspective. Mhm.
Yeah. Dr. Alexandra, your book, Love Every Day, the new one, is so damn dense in the best way possible. There is so much that I want to go into here. It's like what, 400 pages? Yeah, it's over 400 pages. It covers so much ground. It's literally a couples therapy crash course the way I see it. And the page that's particularly relevant to our conversation today is 53. On page 53, it's in like big bold letters as the header. You write that couples must continually wrestle with the following question: in what ways does this
Yeah.
intimate partnership nourish our individual ambitions, passions, and dreams? And there's a little box here that I do want to read out loud about queer couples. Queer couples must explore how gender expression, masculine presentation, feminine presentation could create tilts toward or away from each partner's ambition. So
Mhm.
I think,
Mhm.
despite speaking in heteronormative terms, I think this does apply universally. I mean, you cover a lot in this book, so I don't even know if you remember specifically, but what was the motivator for you writing about this topic that I think a lot of relational therapy misses, which is what you said about that little triangle, wait, two
Mhm.
individual me's and then a we.
I think it's a theme I mean, it's such a theme woven throughout the entries of Love Every Day. I mean, it's the heart of relational, all of my work is under the umbrella of relational self awareness. It's sort of understanding ourselves in the context of our relationships. And so it is holding on to the me inside of the we. And I think that is one of the things that can just feel so confounding. It's like, do I get to still pursue my dreams, and how? And what happens when my dreams bump up against your dreams? And how do we get creative about that? The possibilities are infinite always about how couples sequence dreams or prioritize dreams or viewing your relationship in chapters. Like, I think there are so many possibilities, but a couple can't get to those possibilities until and unless they are able to kind of sit with the feelings that come up with either the feelings that come up with the feelings that come up when I say to my partner, this is really important to me. Like,
Mhm.
I have to feel a kind of entitlement to say
Yeah.
that this is really important to me, but I have to also have a kind of humility about that because this is important to me, but also our relationship is important to me. So I don't quite know, right? I love when we can go to each other and say, I don't quite know. I'm caught. I'm struggling. One part of me is, feeling so ambitious. And another part of me is worried that my ambition will push you away or will put us at risk of growing distant from each other. I think those are the tensions and they aren't solvable, but especially when we get afraid, we get super binary and we go, it's either I get to follow my passions or I don't. It's either
Yeah.
I get what I want or they get what they want. I think fear makes us binary and then we lose access to that whole plane of possibility. And like, what's more powerful than two people who love each other, shoulder to shoulder, looking at this whole plane of possibilities and being like, okay, what are we going to build here? Right? We
Mhm.
can't build it all at once. And sometimes what we want to build is going to be in tension with each other, but anything's possible.
I love that. Fear makes us binary. For me, it's that narrative of like, I can either be a mom or like a good mom or run my business.
Yes, that's the biggie. That's the
Yeah.
biggie.
It
Yeah. I
helps
mean,
so much to see people who are doing both.
yeah,
But then it
yeah,
also adds to the pressure of like, I have to do it all. Eve Rodsky talks about this. We did an episode with her and it was
yeah.
amazing. But also like how you can be anything translates into you must be everything for
Right.
so many of us.
Right. Well, and especially in this, I think that those of us who are drawn to things that are entrepreneurial, especially, like there's no sense. I mean, I don't know how it is for you, but there's never a sense that I'm done, like that my
Mhm.
day is done, that my job is done, that I have, there's always more that can be done or created or zhuzh or, you know,
Yeah.
so I think that's especially true. But I think with every I'm struck by the fact that when I went to college and grad school many, many, many years ago, I had that tension, especially as a young feminist, of like, how am I going to be the mom I want to be, the wife I want to be, and the professional I want to be? And I've got college students today in 2024 who still, women.
Yeah.
I've yet to hear a male student, verbalize this tension, but for the women, it's as real as it was for me all those years ago.
You alluded that it takes a certain level of, you said entitlement. I would also couple it with maybe empowerment, that relational self awareness to be like, I'm even having this inkling that like I need to do something else, pursue something different, ask you to support me in my dreams that
Mhm.
might be silly at first, but actually mean something to me that I'm struggling to communicate. For example, you alluded that to get to that point, like we have to realize that within ourselves, like there's a little part of me that's like missing something. And you at the beginning you gave me so much grace with saying like, there might be a little part of you that's like annoyed that your interest rate is higher now in
Mhm.
your new car because your husband decided to take your car out when you were out of town, right? In the same way, like for example, there's this little part of me that yesterday I was small talking at an event and they asked like why I live in Arizona, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I studied in Canada, came back for a short time, told myself it was just temporary, met this guy, became my husband. Now I'm here, right? It's a great story. And I do love Arizona. And I'm really glad I'm here. And I love
Fine,
my
right,
home.
right.
Yeah. I don't think I need to like overexpress my gratitude to you because you
Mhm.
understand there's a little part of me that's like, if we haven't had met, I might be experiencing a totally different life in a
Yes.
totally different place, expressing certain parts of myself that suppressed feels like too heavy of a word. I'm not going to say like
Mhm.
repressed or suppressed, but just like had to be put aside temporarily
Mhm.
because I love the life I'm living now. So there's this element of like grieving these like lost parts of yourself and
Yeah.
feeling empowered in your choice without having the connectors be resentment.
That's right. That's right. That's right. What I want to say to individuals or couples when they're at that crossroads, like when they're deciding A versus B, I think the conversation that's so important that both people come away from the conversation or really the conversations feeling like neither one is like the one, for you guys, that Stan to really feel like he's not strong arming Mary, and for Mary to really feel like she's not a victim. That like
Mhm.
there's a clear eyedness, there's like a mutual responsibility, and that Stan can open up space inside of his heart to say like, I am enough, that I'm deserving of a partner
Mhm.
who picks up her life and builds it here. Because if he can't feel his own enoughness around that, then any
Mm.
whisper of your unhappiness triggers shame in him.
Oh my gosh,
And then
yes.
and then you're stuck reassuring and reassuring and reassuring. No, it's fine. No, it's fine. No, it's fine. And then you don't get to have space for the little part of you that's like, I mean, a little bit I miss Canada.
Yeah.
Canada? Is that where you were?
Yeah, or a little
When
bit
you're
I
like,
miss some
yeah, a
part
little,
of the
yeah.
world that I
Because
haven't lived in.
yeah, yeah. And that for you, when you and Stan made that decision, you had to make sure that you didn't like keep powder dry. You know what I mean? Like be like, sure, I'll do this. But a little part of me is
Mm,
like, I can't, now I've got a little bit of money in the bank here and I can use this down the road when I don't get something else that I want. Yeah, but we
mhm,
live here because of you. I mean, I think that's like that's the kind of
mm,
mutual accountability that a couple needs to have at that decision point, because because the decision needs to feel as mutual, as clear-eyed, with making space for all of the grief and all of the gratitude so that it doesn't come up later in the form of resentment, in the
yeah.
form of, all of that.
Well, you just perfectly expressed why I'm able to small talk like that at an event with my husband standing right there and him being like, "Yeah, that's exactly what happened," and taking it
Right.
with the lightness and humor and, like, love that
Mhm.
is there as
Mhm.
opposed to the resentment that is exactly why, because he feels so, like, whole within himself and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Right. And
love that.
anchored that he, like able to touch into the part that he's playing in creating a life that is really good for you
Mhm.
and with you, that he can
Mm.
feel his own worthiness, right? You don't have to constantly affirm for him that, no, it's okay. No, it's okay. Cause he's like, yeah, we're living here because I'm worth her living here. And this is a back and forth. And in a
Yeah.
relationship, there are choices that are that technically, if you put it under a microscope, it's better, quote unquote, better for me than for her. And on the whole in our relationship, there are lots of things that go in her direction as well, that benefit her, that support her, that nourish her.
Mhm.
Yeah.
On that note, do you think that you need to fully love yourself before you can love someone else? I'm wondering what your stance on that is.
You know, I always thought that was true. Like I had sort of been teaching that idea for a long time about the ways in which like we love ourselves first and then we can love somebody else, until Lizzo blew it up for me. She did years ago. She was doing a Tiny Desk concert for NPR. She said that whole idea that you can't love somebody until you love yourself is bullshit. You love me. You love me and all of my imperfections. And because you love me, you can love yourself. Like she was like,
Mm.
the idea was like, look at the ways in which you love others. Your capacity to love others affirms that you have a deep capacity for love. And all it needs is the arrow kind of bent back towards yourself. Like you can
Mhm.
leverage the love you so easily give to others and sort of bend it back towards yourself. So it's like, I think it's cyclical. I think the arrow goes in both directions. And it was just I never ever have
Yeah.
forgotten, that invitation to add some nuance, because I think it puts the idea of, oh my God, I can't love somebody else till I love myself. Okay, well, I guess I need 10 years of therapy before I can date.
Yeah, right. And
So,
whereas instead it's simply like just a readjustment, redirection of that loving energy that you already have. One of the lines that is so powerful for me from your work is that love has the power to wound us, but it can also heal us. And I really like that because I've felt healed. Even the relationships that ended up in breakups and heartache and heartbreak still healed certain parts of me
mhm.
in some way. For example, like my ex and I, where we ended really badly, well, he was the number one supporter of my recovery from an eating disorder. Like I would not have gotten
Yeah,
through that if I didn't have him by my side in that capacity. There were other things, but also like I didn't love myself, but he did, even when I gained weight and when I was going through all this stuff.
right. Yeah, and so what a disservice it would be to yourself, to him, to that time that you spent together. What a disservice it would be to say that because the relationship ended, it was a bad relationship. That would be a
Yeah.
disservice, and it would be actually a revisionist history, right? Because
Mhm.
there were beautiful things that happened even within a relationship that was not sustainable. I would never want to pressure somebody to say, you have to find the gold in the bad thing. Because I think that can sometimes, that's a way that we are at risk of like gaslighting ourselves or not honoring the full depths of our pain. But I
Mhm.
do think I do want us to stay open to the possibilities that really beautiful things happen inside of even very
Yeah.
painful or unsustainable situations.
Mhm. Yeah, I think seeing it in that way is healing in and of itself.
Right.
Speaking of revisionist history, okay, you mentioned dating. As a whole, is dating objectively harder these days, or are we facing some kind of like rosy retrospection where we see like our parents or grandparents that have been married a while, we're like, oh, so much easier back then because they just, met and stayed together. Clearly, I see some like biases and like uncontrolled experimentation that's all anecdotal there. So I think it's kind of like rosy retrospection. I know there's like human brains tend to romanticize the past. There's a whole movie, like a rom-com about it, Midnight in Paris, and I think that illustrates it so perfectly. So curious in your work, like is dating objectively harder in 2024 than it was in say even 2014, 10 years ago?
Yes, I think so. I have no problem saying that, and it feels very true to me. Um, and I think if we were to give a scientific explanation, we'd have to come up with some more sophisticated, kind of questions about like how do we operationalize what hard means? Are we looking at like
Mhm.
success rates? Are we looking at ratio of dates to committed relationships? We have to kind of figure out some metrics for how we define hard. But I think there's no getting around the fact that it's this time of tremendous expansion where, like, it used the model, the kind of what I call it the role to role. We're making what I call a role to soul transition. So typically intimate partnerships were heavily role bound, like we were talking about before. One
Mhm.
man, one woman. You know what he's got to do, you know what she's got to do. So all you had to do as a man was find a woman with like childbearing hips, who knew how to cook. And as a woman, all you had to do was find a man who didn't drink, didn't hit you, and could like bring home money or, a deer, whatever, depending on how far back in history we're going to go.
Just to illustrate that you're not like being facetious, but this is real. Like my grandma has said, I swear those exact same words in Russian to my mother.
Yeah. That was what she needed to find. Make
Yeah,
sure he
at
doesn't
least
hit
he doesn't
you.
hate you, doesn't drink. Yep.
Yeah, the bar for a successful marriage was was much lower than it
Mhm.
is lower and qualitatively different than today. And so today, people certainly, Mary's Cup of Tea listeners are wanting soul to soul relationships, right? We want to feel seen and heard and validated. We want our, dreams to be supported. We want to be able to kind of become the best versions of ourselves. So there's that. What we want in a relationship is qualitatively different than what people have wanted throughout history. And the possibilities for like the architecture of a relationship are so much more expansive. Are we poly? Are we monogamous? Like, how do we sequence? There also used to be a super clear sequencing of stages of commitment. He asks you out. He, says we are now exclusive. He proposes. Like there used to be like super clear linear steps towards commitment, and they were led across the board by the man. And so there's just like such an expansion of possibilities around gender, around commitment. We partner later, so you just have dating is harder because you got to do it for longer. Generally speaking, people are doing it for more years. When you got married at 23, it wasn't
Yeah.
that hard to date because you didn't have to do it for that long. You had to do it only so long as you got to the point where you could get into a committed relationship. But realistically, most people are going to have more than one love story. So dating is harder because you have to also learn how to break up well, how to heal in the in between time, how to open up your heart again. So
Mhm.
and we haven't even gotten to dating apps, right? Then you add technology in, and that's a whole another thing where tech companies are making gazillions of dollars off of gamifying dating apps, right? It's not
Yeah.
just in a want ad, the newspaper would profit, right? The newspaper would profit because you'd pay to post your, seeking so and so, da da da. But that's different than how dating apps profit. They profit off of your frustration and
Mhm.
your itchiness and unlocking more premium features. It's a whole the it's a game, right? It is not a tool, it's a game. And so there's a whole skill set that daters have to develop about how to use that tool mindfully, how to bring relational self-awareness to this dating app. So yes, it's harder, case closed.
Yeah, yeah. And I think
What do you think? Mhm.
I guess where I expected you to go is talking about how because we have more rights, yay, we love equal rights. And because we have the length of time that we're dating, totally see that. And we feel the need to be more established before we get married as opposed to before even 20, 30 years ago, marriage was a sign of establishment. Like being
That's
married
right.
means like you're officially an adult whereas now it's like kids can get married or adults can get married and divorce is normal for good reasons and then anyway we just have more options like you said more possibilities and opportunities. I think this circles back to where we started this pressure to be perfectly set up in your own life
Yeah.
perfectly going to like loving yourself fully 10 years of therapy. I need to
Mhm.
do all these things for myself. I need to see the world. I need to get my job, build my career, and I'm not going to commit legally. And I completely understand it. Like when somebody's telling me this, totally valid. And I'm very lucky to be in the situation that I am to feel that marriage was right for me in this time. And I think people see marriage and commitment in some ways as as like losing themselves, as like giving up on their aspirations.
I think you're making a number of really good points, and I don't know that there's a right way and a wrong way. I think that there is a model of marriage where people come together and build together. And I think there's a model of marriage where people build on their own and then they come together and, merge their empires. I remember listening to Logan Ury, who wrote a book called How Not to Die Alone. And she's a relationship scientist for one of the big
Mhm.
dating apps. And she talked about the idea of a marriage being a startup versus a merger. And very often, if you get married, in your earlier 20s or in your 20s, your marriage is a bit more of a startup, like you're saying. It's sort of
Yeah.
the a step towards, and you're building together. That's a beautiful way to do it. To build together is really beautiful. And to merge is really beautiful as well, to kind of create a merger of two well-established systems. There's just challenges in both. There are challenges and opportunities in both of those models. When you do the
Yeah.
startup model, the challenge is you're taking a risk. What if we grow in different directions? The
Yeah.
merger model, the challenge is it's really freaking hard to merge. Are we living in my house or your house? Are we using your dish towels or my dish towels? Like there's challenges in both directions. So, but neither, I think we have to really remember that it's not like I think that where we go wrong in all this relationship talk is we imagine that there's a right way and a wrong way. And that's where we get ourselves tripped up and scared. And once we're
Mhm.
scared that we're doing it the wrong way, then everything gets cast in a light and we start to spiral into how we're doomed. And then I think couples really can start to actually doom themselves versus trusting that there are lots of paths, lots of ways of
Yeah.
doing this, as long as they're founded, as long as the couple can keep turning to each other and saying, how am I doing?
Mhm.
I'm not feeling so seen. Can we focus on this? Can we make a little more space for this?
Let me tell you why your work and your book is so damn powerful. Many, many reasons. You give space for so many different experiences, and you just highlighted that there's no right or wrong way to do it. I think with that, there's a difference between like an individual experience and what's individually right for you, and then like collective, like what's happening in trends in society. What does the
Mhm.
research show? Whatever, and those are two totally separate things. So you might fit into that statistic, the average, the normal, whatever we deem it to be at the time, or it might be completely different. And when I tell you that these 400 pages are so dense and so specific, because they address anything that you could possibly face as individuals and as a couple, and I love that.
Mhm.
So can I ask you one more? You say there's no right or wrong way, but this might be a trick question in that sense, because like I'm curious to know, like as a couples therapist, is there a right or wrong in
Okay.
this specific situation? I was at dinner a couple of nights ago with a friend, and she looked at me and said, "The key to a good relationship is to always go through their phone. Go through your man's phone, go
Oh.
through your partner's phone." Well, you're having such an endearing reaction to this. I was like, "Oh my god, you psychopath." I have been with my partner for 5 years now. We're coming up on 5 years. I have never once gone through his phone, ever,
Mm.
ever. I've never even looked at it. I've thought about it at times, but I've never actually acted on those thoughts because I feel like it's such an invasion of privacy. Talk to us about the difference between privacy and secrecy, and what you think about going through your partner's phone.
Right. That's right. She has a very concrete method for how she anchors what she's saying is the heart of a good relationship is trust. But she's got an interesting route to get there, right? She has a concrete route to get there. She's saying the way that you feel trust is by looking at their phone. I want her to have about 8 different avenues for how she feels trust. She's right in that trust is bedrock. Trust is, as you will see in one of the 365 entries of the
Mhm.
book, trust is an energetic shortcut. There's research that shows that like when we don't trust somebody, like the brain physiology is so much different. Like the amount of glucose and oxygen it takes to be in conversation with somebody you don't trust is
Mhm.
much higher than when you're in conversation with someone you trust. Because when you don't trust somebody, you're running all of their words and all of their facial expressions and all of their body postures through all these filters inside of you. Is that really what they mean? Is that really
Yeah.
what they mean? There's so much thought and so much like bodily sensation that has to accompany a conversation when you're with somebody you don't trust. And so, and when you're with somebody you trust, you can just take their words and their body language. It's all kind of synced up. It all sets inside of you, and there's kind of a flow there. And so she's saying you got to have a route to feel that settled feeling inside of you. And she's saying
Mm.
the best route is going through their phone.
Well, you're way more
I,
compassionate than I am.
I would not advise it. I would not. Now, when a couple comes to me in the breach of after an affair, that is very commonly what we do is we talk about passwords and we talk about transparency. And that is a vehicle for helping a betrayed partner feel like they've got a freaking solid place to put their foot, but it cannot be the only way. Vigilance cannot be the only route to trust. There's got to be how my body feels next to your body. There's got to be a sense that you see me and you understand me. Like there's all kinds of other avenues to trust besides that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would not get on. I have compassion for her desire, but I take issue with her methodology.
And this is the same person who was really shocked when I told her that I have my husband blocked on my social media.
Mm. Uh-huh.
I have
Uh-huh.
my husband blocked on my social media
Uh-huh.
because I get I share a lot of vulnerable things on there, and
Mhm.
I phrased it like this. I'm like, I don't go through your emails, every email as they come. And to me, my social media is my work and it feels like my like email exchange. At the end
Great.
of the day, I show him my Instagram stories, I show him my posts. He's the one filming my content. He's always like,
Mhm.
you know, I'm always running things by him. He's seen everything, but I want to choose when and where and how I show him certain
I
things
love
as
it.
opposed to him seeing what I'm doing in the house at random times of the day. Cause half the time I'm just like taking pictures of our dog and dressing him up. And anyway, so
Yep, I love it. I love it.
that's like
My
my way
husband
of, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's I think that's great. I think that is like that's a kind of privacy that you need. It's not a secret. A secret is something that is charged, where if he knew, like
Mm,
a secret robs him of agency to make choices. Private is just like you don't need to be in here. You don't need to be, there's nothing going on in here that would change the decisions that you make about yourself, about me, about us. My husband has location. We've got our kids on Life 360. I've got my
mhm.
mom on Life 360. I'm on it. I'm visible. Kids are visible. Todd is not visible. It just says like location hidden since 2020. And he's like, no one needs to know where I am.
Yeah.
And that is private. And so I could spin my wheels about what is he hiding, but that is a place where he just does not feel like I need to know where he is every minute, and that he has earned that trust with me over many, many, many years. And it's a little bit like, there's a way in which when there's trust, it's like a little playful, like, ooh, I don't know where he's been. Like, where might he, it's just a little bit, it's a kind of fun. I think it's a sort of endearing quality about him of where he decides that he needs to have some privacy. But that's something
Yeah.
that that he's earned, that we've earned over time and experience.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully Todd is like Stan where half the time they're just at the store getting us gifts. No, true story. When I'm like, "Where were you? What did you do today?" and he's being sus, almost always it's like it was shopping for like a birthday gift or something.
That's very darling. I love that.
Or organized. Well, okay, to close, and to respect your time, there's one more thing that I want to highlight to our listeners from your book, Love Every Day, which I really hope everybody gets because it's like a dictionary for relationships for couples therapy. That's how
Mhm.
I see it. You wrote about multitudes and how people contain multitudes based on the Walt Whitman quote that I love. And the quote is, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." And so you write about how you say we are all at risk of over identifying with one facet of who we are to the point that it eclipses all other facets. This makes us vulnerable to identity questions when our context changes. If I am
Mhm.
not X, then who am I? And sometimes you say that the gift of close relationships is that your partner can say things like, I've loved you long before you were X, and I'll love you long after, or that was a thing you did, not a thing you are. And you contain multitudes in a sense that like there's so much to you. And part of the beauty of being in a long-term partnership is that there's somebody to witness that and to remind you of that when you're struggling. And I really just wanted to close with that because I think it answers the question of how do you love someone else
Yeah,
without losing yourself? It's like, hopefully, if you're in a healthy place in your union, that person reminds you of who you are without them too.
that's right. That's right. Ugh, this is why I love spending time with you. Yes, I've got chill bumps. Absolutely. Yeah,
I
that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing.
I wish couples therapists could have assistants because I I would love to be like your tech. Like could there be a couples therapy tech?
That's right. I'm like, Mary, I'm gonna bring you in here. What am I missing?
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
Do you mind taking some emotional blood pressure here?
That's right. That's right. How are we doing?
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra, for your book, Love Every Day, and for all the work you do on social media, your podcast, and beyond.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me again.